Okay. All right, welcome everyone. Hopefully everybody can see my screen. What I have here today, I have about 10 or 11 slides that I wanted to run through just to give some background on the NPDES Phase 2 program that the local agencies and government agencies have to adhere to as part of their permit requirements with the Illinois EPA. And so what I'd like to do is just run through those very quickly, and then we'll quickly going to open it up to a panel discussion. I have two counterparts here, Mark Phipps with the City of Aurora and Scott Kuykendall with McHenry County, who both work extensively managing their respective agencies' MS4 programs, and they'll be able to provide some commentary on what their agencies are doing to meet the NPDES Phase 2 program requirements. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some of the proposed changes. I think the genesis or the reason why this program came about was back in September of 2021. The Illinois EPA put out a public comment proposed changes to their NPDES Phase 2 program. So all of the agencies, their permits were technically expiring. Their notice of intents were expiring last February. And so we're kind of continuing, we're in overtime, if you will. And there's a the new notice of intents are going to be required to be submitted to the IPA sometime later on here in 2022. So that's kind of the background for where this comes from. For those of you that aren't familiar with NPDES, I know engineers, we like to throw around a lot of acronyms in that. The NPDES stands for the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. And that really goes back a long time ago, back into 1990 here in the state of Illinois. And that was, at that point, the original Phase 1 was targeting the large municipal separate storm sewer system. So basically like City of Chicago, City of Rockford, as well as industrial facilities, and then also construction sites that were larger than 5 acres or more. Where it really kind of came close to home, particularly with regards to the local municipalities and the county governments here, was back in 2003. The Phase 2 program was enacted, and therefore all of the communities that fit those requirements were required to obtain a permit with the state of Illinois. And so, and then as well as construction sites, they brought that down to 1 acre or less, or excuse me, to anything larger than 1 acre would be required to get a permit. And again, this is all managed by the IEPA. And so we use the term MS4, and we kind of throw that around, but MS4 again stands for Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System. And what that really is that a lot of times people think of that as just being your storm sewers, your pipe network, but in fact, it actually can include storm drains, ditches, swales, any of the publicly owned drainage infrastructure. So it could be by the state, a municipality, town, village, any township road districts, for example, would fall under this. Those would all qualify as having this municipal separate storm sewer system. It excludes combined sewers and sanitary sewers, so anything that drains to a wastewater treatment plant, that's not included as part of that. And so the MS4 communities, you can see, this is an older exhibit, but kind of highlighted where the majority of these MS4 communities are, and that exhibit on the right from 2010. You can see there's a whole bunch of them up here in northeastern Illinois where we're located, but it's basically municipalities with more than 50,000 people, or these areas that are defined as having a population density of 500 people or more per square mile. And that's done, the US Census Bureau puts out those maps. And of course, everything in northeastern Illinois pretty much falls under that, as far as, and including a good portion of McHenry County and Kane County. The boundary kind of goes through the middle or so of Kane County. So that's why Kane County, for example, is listed along with a number of municipalities within our boundary. But then also the Highway the drainage, the department's transportation, the township drainage, or excuse me, the township highway districts, those are all listed as well. And so the primary requirements in the NPDES Phase 2 program, obviously it's targeted at eliminating or reducing water pollution discharged into the waters of the United States. And it really centers around these 6 minimum control measures that have to be addressed as part of each community or each MS4's permit. And so those 6 control measures are the first 2 really involve public education outreach and engaging the public, so public involvement and participation. The third measure is identifying, detecting, and eliminating the illicit discharges, so any non-stormwater discharges. So an approved discharge would be obviously stormwater runoff, as well as the IEPA has put together a list of acceptable discharges, what they call the non-stormwater discharges, such as pumped water and things like that. Anything doesn't have any contaminants in it. But so it's important that those things are, that we make a distinction between an allowed discharge and an illicit discharge. And then the next 2 really center around construction site runoff. So what happens during, they center around development, what happens during the development process, and then what happens after the development occurs in terms of the post-construction stormwater management. And then finally, the last control measure is targeting at the individual MS4 agencies, organizations, and what are they doing in-house in terms of pollution prevention, good housekeeping practices, trainings, and things like that. So we're just going to run through these really quick just to give some examples. So when we open up the panel discussion, everybody has some ideas of the types of things that are being done by each of the agencies to address these 6 minimum control measures. So for public education outreach, of course, that would be distribution and publication of educational materials. So things that are on the website, social media postings, newsletters that are passed out. Some other things that some communities are doing. For example, I know in King County, we put up stream signage. So again, to let the public know, for example, some places will put up watershed boundary signs. I know we have a couple that are going up in the northern part of the county, up near Long Meadow Parkway and Joki Creek. But elsewhere where we have waters, larger tributaries, Blackberry, Fearson, Tyler Creek, Big Rock Creek, for example, we have stream signage that's been put up, and I know many communities will do that. Another part of public education would be demonstration projects. So working with private organizations or other NGOs to install rain gardens, bioretention basins, things like that, and then to be able to kind of publicize that to get that out into the public. Another aspect is the agency's participation in the watershed group. So we have a number of active watershed groups in the Fox River watershed, and so it's important that we try to participate in those so that we're aware of what's happening in those and can also contribute and help guide those watershed groups in making good decisions in planning efforts in that to try to affect positive changes in the water quality within their individual watersheds. As far as public involvement and participation, that would be conducting stakeholder meetings of various types, coordinating and conducting volunteer stream cleanups and watershed training, hosting watershed and stream tours of the different facilities. I know we actually had one just recently here in the past, back over the summer at the village of Pinker Grove, that was put on by FREP, I believe, I think hosted that one. Actually, it was FREP and combination of the Tyler Creek watershed group. And that was an excellent tour, kind of a behind the scenes of what happens at these municipal water treatment facilities and wastewater treatment facilities. And so those are some things that can be utilized to really engage the public. The illicit discharge detection and elimination. So a key component of that is if you suspect, or in order to determine if you have an illicit discharge, you have to know where your drainage infrastructure is at and how it's connected to the receiving stream. So having an accurate and up-to-date stormwater mapping system is very important. That's something that we've all been tasked with working on. Most of the communities in the area have those to a various degree of completeness, although it's obviously an ongoing challenge to keep those things up to date and current. The next important aspect of that is to be able to respond to the calls about any suspected spills or unknown discharges that are happening in the water course and to investigate those. And certainly the communities have to have the regulatory infrastructure or language in place in their ordinances to allow the agencies to actually stop those illicit discharges and to enforce those requirements. And then the other aspect that is required as this minimum control measure is to have a program in place to perform some type of dry weather screening of the stormwater outfalls, again, to try to further increase the probability of finding any of these illicit discharges. As we know, illicit discharge, one key indicator from those can often be when it's not raining out and we have a storm sewer system that's continuing to discharge. There's always some additional investigation that should be done to determine, is that just some type of a groundwater contribution, or is that something maybe somebody's connected into the system further upstream. The construction site stormwater runoff control, this control measure, thankfully we have the luxury here in the 7-county area in Northeast Illinois, because of the state regulations. We have the ability to have a countywide stormwater ordinance, which is kind of a luxury in other parts of the state and of course throughout the country that doesn't necessarily exist. But because of that, most of the communities, if not all of them here, at least in the Fox River watershed and McHenry and Kane County and Lake County and DuPage, for example, have very robust ordinance in place to regulate construction site runoff to make sure that it meets these requirements that are listed in the NPDES Phase 2 program. And then likewise with the post-construction minimum control measures. So this is really referring to the drainage infrastructure for an existing development or a newly constructed development, those stormwater detention basins, the on-site green infrastructure, those best management practices such as the rain gardens and bioretention basins and all of those features that are put in place to collect the stormwater runoff, to infiltrate it and or filter it and clean it and reduce the amount of pollutants that are in that runoff before it's discharged downstream. And then another important aspect that again is in all of these stormwater ordinances is that it's one thing to just to define what needs to be built, but there also has to be some regulatory language in place in order to require that the long-term owners of those developed portions, whether it's an HOA or the individual landowners, parcel owners, that they have, there's a mechanism in place to require them to implement long-term operation and maintenance. And that's an ongoing challenge. I know, for example, in King County that we have, where we have a lot of older developments that came into existence long before the stormwater ordinance. And so we have a lot of orphaned stormwater infrastructure, and that's an ongoing challenge. And we'll probably talk about that during the panel discussion of how do we address those things. But certainly for all new developments, post-ordinance development, this is something that we have in place that is required and helps us to make sure that those things are continually managed. And then the final minimum control measure is the pollution prevention and good housekeeping. So again, these are the things that are put in place by the local agency to store materials and conduct their operations. For example, like the department's transportation, for them to be able to conduct their operations for road maintenance, for winter programs as far as salt application, that kind of thing. These are this basically comes down to all of the things that are in place in order for them to operate, do the things that they need to do while minimizing the potential release or discharge of any kind of contaminants into the stormwater system. And then in addition to those 6 control measures, so those are the things that you have to do, that the agency has to do in order to affect and improve the water quality. But then there's also reporting, monitoring, and documentation. And so every agency is required every 5 years, there is a notice of intent that is filed, and everybody has those. Those should all be posted online for every community. If you have question about whether or not a community has an MS4 or an NPDES phase 2 permit, you can go to their website and it should be on there. And in addition to the notice of intent, which is valid for 5 years, then every year or by June 1st, each community is required to submit an annual report that reports how they met those 6 minimum control measures, what they did not do, and basically to kind of give an accounting of what occurred in the previous reporting period, which goes from essentially March to March of each year. And then finally, each community should have posted again online what's called a stormwater management program plan. And so this is intended to be a concise document. So whereas the MS4 notice of intent really kind of defines the individual activities that are being done to meet those 6 minimum control measures, the stormwater management plan is intended to kind of be a summary document that lays out not only how those minimum control measures are met, but also basically who's doing what and how the process works within each agency, so that there should be no question as to whose responsibility it is for tracking illicit discharges, or for making sure that training for the plow drivers occurs for SELT application and things like that. So that's another good resource for the general public, I think, or people that are interested in what's happening with their community's NPDES phase 2 program. They can go to that document, and that should really help to kind of lay out who's doing what and how they're doing it. And so one of the things actually that we'll probably transition to is going to come up during this panel discussion after I turn it over to Mark and to Scott, is the third component besides the reporting and the documentation, but that's the monitoring. And that's one of the things that's being proposed to be changed here in the next iteration of these permits. And so we'll have some discussions about that as well. For the purposes of this panel discussion, I did throw up a couple of topics just to make sure, and I'll kind of leave this slide up. We can go back and forth if we need to, but I was hoping that maybe we could talk about each individual agency's approach to how they're operating their MS4 permit, their comments on monitoring, whether that's stream monitoring or monitoring and inspecting outfalls, how they're funding their programs, the amount of staff and the challenges associated with that, working across the multiple departments within a given organization, and then how they're partnering with other non-governmental organizations, particularly to meet those first 2 measures, control measures as far as public education outreach. So with that, I'm going to open it up to, I think maybe Mark, if you want to talk a little bit about some of the specifics of Aurora, and then we'll go to Scott, and then I guess we'll ask Jeff to kind of track comments, and then we can kind of go from there.
Okay, thanks, Rob. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. And Rob, you did a nice job there summarizing the program and what some of the, what all of the requirements are, the 6 minimum control measures, and some examples of what a community might do for each of those. And I mean, if anybody has specific questions about Aurora's program and what we're doing to meet those minimum control measures, I'd be glad to answer questions on those. But I think you gave a lot of examples, a lot of nice ideas, and a lot of those kind of line up with what Aurora is doing. So I don't want to cover that unless somebody has a specific question, but I would be glad to talk a little bit about what we're doing for water quality monitoring and the way the permit is set up, specifically with regard to the water quality monitoring requirements, but also many of the other facets of the program. There's a lot of flexibility. So what's required for one municipality isn't necessarily required for all of the other municipalities. With regard to water quality monitoring, each municipality should determine, kind of what the pollutants of concern are, or what's some data that is important to the community that can address pollutants of concern. And Aurora happens to be situated along the banks of the Fox River, and we have years of data that's been provided by Fox Metro, where we've got, one of the stations where they were collecting water quality is at Sullivan Road, which is near the northern limits of the city. and then also at North Avenue, which is near the southern limits. And so we've got good records, and even beyond that, what Fox River Study Group has been collecting. They've got a station in Geneva and a station in Montgomery. So we've got good data that shows us what typical water quality parameters are in the Fox River for years and years and years. And so what we decided to do, we picked out a few locations in the city where we've got large diameter storm sewers or open channels, and started collecting water quality data on those. Now the program requires that you do quarterly sampling, and so that's what we've done. We could, of course, do more frequent sampling, but there's a cost associated to that. So we picked out a number of water quality parameters and a few locations, 6 in all, and started collecting water quality data. And we started this about, I want to say maybe 5 or 6 years ago, when water quality data collection became a requirement of the program. And so through the data that's been provided by Fox River Study Group and Fox Metro, we've been able to compare the end of pipe sampling data or stream sampling data within the city limits to typical water quality data in the Fox River. And if it's okay, Rob, maybe you stop sharing your screen and I'll share a graphic that kind of shows what we've. This isn't necessarily the most. Can you guys see the graphics that are on the screen?
Yeah, that looks pretty clear.
I think I'm sharing. Okay, good. So this is for 2020 to 2021. I need to update these graphs based on the data that we've collected in the last year. But what you can see in the blue line and the red line is upper quartile and lower quartile of Fox River data from the Geneva station and the Montgomery station. So this is basically what you would expect to see as typical water quality in the Fox River as it's flowing through Aurora. And then the bar graphs are the end of pipe or in stream, from Waubonsee Creek or other locations in the city. So this is basically the city's stormwater contribution to creeks or to the Fox River. The groupings of the data down here match it basically follows along with the reporting year. So it starts in Q2 of 2020, and then Q3, Q4, and then Q1 of 2021. But I think what these graphs are showing is that you've got typical Fox River data, and whether we're looking at pH, total suspended solids, total phosphorus, or TKN, that in most cases the water that's coming out of the storm sewer system in Aurora is equivalent to or better than the quality of the water that's flowing through the Fox River. Now there are some notable exceptions. There are a couple of storm events where we got high total suspended solids. Those are things we'll keep an eye on, particularly if we start to see high total suspended solids or some other parameter is always high or always higher than what we would expect to see as typical in the Fox River. Then that would warrant maybe a little bit more detail. And what the NPDES program would allow you to do is, if let's say we're collecting all this data for all these different locations in the city, if we decided that there's one particular location in the city that warrants specific attention because of a particular pollutant of concern, or because it seems like there's, whether it's fecal coliform or dissolved oxygen, something isn't matching up, and so we want to do a little more detailed investigation, we could make a change to our program and we could focus on that parameter in that location and maybe do sampling at different locations on Waubonsee Creek or at different locations in a 48-inch diameter storm sewer. Wherever we're seeing the problem, we could change our program and start doing a little bit more detailed analysis so that we could try to hone in on the pollutants of concern in a certain area.
Hey, Mark, this is Rob. Can I ask you a quick question on that?
Yeah, sure.
Just so I understand, you said that the sampling, this is the quarterly sampling. So, like, for example, those bars, those sites where you have large concentrations of total phosphorus or TSS in that, Were these collected specifically, were they dry weather samples, or was it just on whatever day you guys happened to be out to collect it? And so it might correspond with a wet weather event, or how was that determined?
We've got a consultant that collects these samples and then takes them to the lab, and that agreement says that they will pick a day in each quarter where there is at least a quarter inch of rainfall within a 24-hour period. So this consulting firm has a rain gauge at their site. They're here in Aurora, and so these all are wet weather events. Now, sometimes the wet weather event starts in the middle of the night and they collect their samples in the morning, or sometimes it starts in the morning and they collect the samples in the afternoon. So there's that variability in it, but yeah, these are all wet weather samples.
Okay, all right, thank you.
And I don't want to take up all the time, so I'll stop sharing. I'll let Scott jump in.
Yeah, why don't we? Yeah, let's turn over to Scott. We'll let him jump in, and then there's some other things we can come back to, because I know that generate your comments there generated some other questions, and I'm sure Scott will generate some more. So go ahead, Scott. Do you have anything you want to share, or?
Well, I'll talk first, and then
Sure.
I can share some slides. We're a little bit different than Mark's situation. So as a county, we are only responsible for the unincorporated portions of the county. Most of our municipalities have their own MS4 that they are responsible for. I know in Lake County and DuPage County, their departments will oversee the MS4 and provide assistance for the entire county. That's not our role in McHenry County. Each municipality has their own MS4 program that they're responsible for. And our responsibility is for the unincorporated portions of the county. And one of the differences there, so where Mark's Aurora's focus would be is on their storm sewer system. As a county, we don't have a storm sewer system. We have a series of ditches and culverts and outfalls. And so things are a little bit different. We don't do the water quality monitoring like Mark is doing. We do coordinate with different organizations, but we're not doing the sophisticated water quality monitoring that Mark was talking about. We share responsibility for our MS4 between departments. The primary department is the McHenry County Department of Planning and Development, where I am. And we coordinate with our McHenry County Division of Transportation and our health department to comply with the MS4 program that we developed in our audit with the IEPA in 2017. And so we largely focus in the planning and development. We've primarily focused on the first two minimum control measures. So the public education and outreach and public involvement and participation. The illicit discharge detection and elimination control measure is largely done by our health department. So they will receive complaints and then respond to them to determine whether or not it is an actual illicit discharge. And then we track that data and report that to the IEPA as part of our annual report. The McHenry County Division of Transportation is also conducting inspections on the culverts and in outlets as part of their jurisdiction. And so they have 107 outfalls that they're responsible for tracking. And every year they have high priority sites that they go to every year. The remainder get inspected in 5-year increments. So over each 5-year period, all of those outfalls will be inspected, and then it'll start over again. And they've done a really good job. We've worked together over the past several years to really do much better mapping of our outfall locations and tying that in with our GIS systems. And we also have a county stormwater management ordinance, and that fulfills the best control measure for construction sites, stormwater runoff control, and for post-construction stormwater management control. And then pollution prevention, good housekeeping is largely the responsibility of our Division of Transportation, but that applies to all of our other departments too. So facilities plays a major role in that, our emergency management agency, our police department. So those everybody is responsible for meeting the pollution prevention and good housekeeping minimum control measures. So I can show you some of the things that we've done for our public outreach and education. I'm
Yeah,
not quite.
Scott, why don't you go ahead and pull some of that up here? I'll stop this here and then you can.
There we go. Is that working?
Yep, there we go.
Okay. So one of our priority pollutants that we are trying to take care of is our chlorides. Let's see how. So with our Division of Transportation, we run a sensible salting workshop every year. At least we did in the before times. We have our own program that we run in conjunction with the village of Algonquin. And we've trained over 1,000 people over since 2009. So the way we do our program is we have a report and review inside, and then we go out and we do training, hands-on training outside. And we do hope to be able to do that again next year. Our Division of Transportation really has taken a big leadership role in sensible salting. And just so everybody knows, sensible salting is using only what is necessary to maintain safe roads. Much of what is put down in conventional applications is excessive. Anything beyond what is actually necessary to maintain safety has no benefit to it, but it comes at great environmental and economic impact. So we are really trying to focus on sensible salting. We're only putting down what is necessary. And there are a variety of ways that we do that. And one of the primary tools is liquids. So putting down liquids instead of solid material. And our Division of Transportation is now operating, there's 3 routes last year. They actually have 4 routes where it's liquid only. And each route has a 38% reduction in chloride that they're releasing to the environment. And that also equates to a $36,000 savings. So if we are able to transition all of our roads into sensible salting and liquid only, we can save taxpayers quite a bit of money while maintaining safety on the road and reducing impacts to the environment. And so that's part of our MS4 and is what is reported every year. One of the neat projects that we've been working on, and I think this is important to emphasize, is collaboration with different organizations, so watershed groups and other non-governmental organizations. One of the groups we have here in McHenry County is the McHenry County Defenders. I think most people are familiar with them, but they are a local environmental group that's been operating for many, many years and has quite a bit of political influence here in the county. And so we've been working on a collaborative project to put stream signs up like Rob was talking about. And the Defenders obtained grants to fund the projects. So we're able to buy the signs, post, and hardware. Our Division of Transportation has a sign shop where they'll make the signs. And then we work with our Division of Transportation, and then we're going to be working with municipal and township transportation departments to install signs on roads that they're responsible for. And so the only cost to our partners is soft costs to install the signs. Phase 1 was in 2001, and our Division of Transportation installed signs at each crossing on roads that are under county jurisdiction. And so at each crossing, you've got 2 signs facing oncoming traffic in each lane. And in 2022, we just got another $10,000 grant. And we are now going to be working with townships and municipalities to put these signs up on the rest of the roads in the county. In McHenry County, we also have a organization called the McHenry County Schools Environmental Education Program, or MCEP, and they provide lesson plans. They have developed lesson plans, and they can go into classes and provide very high level environmental education curricula. And they can also provide lessons for homeschool students. And we also work together to organize events such as our Groundwater Festival. We used to have 2 festivals each year, and we've had thousands of students participate in those. Hopefully, once again, we can get COVID under control and get back to events like that. We have annual water forum in the county where we have guest speakers, and we choose a theme each year, like flooding. We have sponsors who have tables set up, typically engineering firms, ecological firms, and environmental organizations. And we want to make this fun. It's a very festive environment, so we get grants and cater the event with delicious food. And our tagline is, we want our guests to go home smarter and fuller than they arrived. And so that's it. That kind of gives you an overview of some of the things that we do here, and happy to talk about, answer questions and talk more about the program in greater detail.
All right. Thank you very much for going through that, Scott. I appreciate that. It gives a little better idea of some of the specifics. I especially like you guys using differentiating between the 2 watersheds, between the Kish and the Fox, with the River Otter logo for the Kish and the Fox for the Fox River. So that's kind of neat. So again, I think it's always important that people kind of understand where they're at in the world, where they're at in the watershed, and just kind of helps to foster a little bit better connection there. So, and again, so that kind of highlighted that last bullet point there in terms of the partnerships with these non-governmental organizations, particularly for the public education outreach and the public involvement and participation. And I know, for example, Kane County does that as well. And maybe I do want to make sure I can get both of you guys to kind of comment on staffing and funding here. And I'll talk a little bit just briefly as far as Kane County goes on those 3 bullet points there for the monitoring, outfall monitoring, sampling, funding, and staffing. So, at Kane County, we're staffed. We have we don't even have 1 full-time person working on NPDES phase 2. We have myself, and that's probably less than 25% of my time. And then we have Ivy Klee, who is our sustainability coordinator, and she probably has maybe 10 to 25% of her time is allocated towards working on NPDES phase 2 projects and coordination and the record keeping and that kind of thing. So that's kind of interesting. We definitely run things on a shoestring, so to speak. As far as the funding goes, likewise, when we talk about monitoring that, and again, just too, as a general reminder to anybody, in the chat there, I'll stop talking a minute, let Jeff read off some of the questions. But if folks want to jump in and ask any questions or provide any commentary on what they're doing, I know there's some other NPDES phase 2 MS4 operators here in the room, if you will. I see your names there on the screen, so feel free to chime in. But for example, with King County, with regards to monitoring, we have kind of an interesting situation. So Kane County runs their entire NPDES budget is a little over $65,000. And of that, $60,000 of that actually goes to pay. It goes directly to the U.S. Geological Survey to cover the cost for the 4 rain gauges and 7 stream gauges that we have here in Kane County that the USGS operates. So we have a cooperative agreement. Basically, the only way the USGS will continue to monitor rainfall at those 4 gauges and stream flow at those 7 gauges is if the county continues to provide funding for that. And that funding, is my understanding, through Kane County, doesn't come through our general revenue. Rather, it actually comes through the funds that we receive through riverboat funding. And as you guys all know, the riverboat wasn't doing a lot of business the last couple of years. So I know that's always a potential threat, or it's always in jeopardy. So it really leaves about $5,000 left over afterwards that we're able to utilize to run the rest of the programs as far as the public education outreach and the public involvement and participation. So we do rely very heavily on the NGOs like FREP or Friends of the Fox River, for example, to help us out with some of these additional things like the volunteer cleanups and the citizen training for the macroinvertebrate monitoring and things like that. Again, a lot of this stuff was going along very well, swimmingly, if you will, pre-COVID. And then once COVID hit, everything's kind of, it's been a little bit of a hiccup to say the least. And then as far as the monitoring goes, to kind of put that in perspective, so we're doing a monitoring program for those of you guys that aren't familiar with that or haven't participated in that or had to figure out funding for that. For example, Kane County, we're doing a study right now, a monitoring program where once a month we're going out and we're collecting grab samples and taking them to a lab. So we're providing the staff to go out and do the grab samples, taking them down to First Environmental Lab in Naperville, and we're doing 9 sites at agricultural, either at drain tile outfalls or in our agricultural streams to get some data on what's happening in the undeveloped parts of Kane County. And just for those sites, each site is $750 every time we go out. That's just the lab cost to grab that sample and have that analyzed. So on a per year basis, that's $9,000 per site in order to do that for the year. So as you can see, that cost adds up tremendously. So when I saw Mark running through those sites of all the sampling they were doing, that's a substantial investment that's being put in to the monitoring. And I know one of the questions is with the proposed changes that IEPA was suggesting put out into the public comment period back in the month of September last year, that there could be some potential vast changes in that. They could have some substantial impacts on how communities would be able to satisfy that requirement. So I'm sure there were many comments that were made back to the IEPA during that period of, how exactly are we going to be able to fund that? And then what information is that ultimately going to provide for us? How is that information going to be used? Because I know one of the challenges we have with collecting data is we don't want to just keep collecting data. We want to make sure we're collecting data efficiently so that we can use that to make sound and efficient decisions. So with that, I'm going to kind of just throw that out there and let Mark or Scott feel free to comment on that, and anybody else if they want to jump in, or Jeff, I'll stop talking.
I'd be glad to answer the first part of that, Rob. So the city's costs for the water quality monitoring program that I mentioned, we try to be as cost effective as possible. And so the cost is reduced a little bit because some of the lab work is done the fecal coliform is done in-house at the City of Aurora's water treatment facility in our lab. So we do that there. And then Fox Metro does some of the water quality treatment or some of the water quality sampling at their lab. What we can't get done at either of those 2 locations, we pay for it also goes to First Environmental in Naperville. So we do as much of the water quality testing as we can in-house. Then we're just paying for the cost of the time and the materials. So the cost and also I think, Rob, all the locations that you were talking about are spread out around a county. Our locations are spread out around a city, so we spend a little bit less time traveling to get to those samples. But in an average year, we probably spend about $6,000 to $8,000 a year collecting those samples, those quarterly samples from the 6 locations, and then running the various tests that we do. We also have a consultant that helps us with our outfall inspections. So like King County and I think Scott mentioned in McHenry County, we prioritize certain outfalls and check those every year. Then the rest of them we spread out and make sure that we're checking every 5 years for signs of illicit discharges. we have a consultant that helps with that, but we want to make sure that there's a two-person team doing that for safety reasons. So we have an intern that helps with that. We probably pay between $2,000 and $4,000 a year to have our high priority outfalls inspected every year, and then 20% of the rest of the city's outfalls inspected in a calendar year. So in the course of the permit period, our high priority outfalls would be inspected 5 times and all of our other outfalls would be inspected once. And then we work with the Friends of the Fox River on an educational program called Watershed Watchdogs, where it's primarily schools, elementary schools, but sometimes high schools can contact Friends of the Fox River. If it's in an Aurora school, then the city would pays Friends of the Fox River to do this Watershed Watchdogs program. It's most effective and it's best done when it's in stream work, and they can have a program where they explain to the kids that it's not just the city's responsibility to care for the watershed, it's the responsibility of everybody who lives in the watershed. And then they take some water quality samples and run those and see what it looks like. And so we pay Watershed Watchdogs, we pay for that Watershed Watchdogs program about $10,000 a year. And that covers Friends of the Fox River's costs to have an educator that's kind of working in the Aurora area and for their materials and such. So altogether, our out-of-pocket cost for our NPDES program is probably around $22,000 a year. Of course, there's a lot of the work that's done by our water and sewer maintenance staff that's cleaning catch basins, and our streets department that's sweeping streets. Our parks maintenance division is taking soil samples to make sure that they're putting the right level of nutrients on the parks soils to manage the vegetation there. We've got review engineers in the engineering department that are reviewing plans, and an inspector that's inspecting construction sites. So a lot of the work is done in-house, and there's not one person that's dedicated full-time to this. I coordinate all of the effort, make sure everybody's doing what needs to be done, and then filing the reports with the EPA. But like Rob said, this would be well less than even a quarter of my time is spent on the program. We've got a pretty good system, and it's up and running, and everybody kind of knows what they need to do, and I try to coordinate the whole thing. So I would say probably 10% of my time is spent on it, and then out of pocket beyond what we're doing with the in-house staff is probably around $22,000 a year.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, I guess similar to what Mark was just saying, we don't have a dedicated staff member for MS4. I am the principal person that oversees and coordinates with all the different departments. But I have other responsibilities. One of the principal responsibilities I have is groundwater. And so it's not directly related, it is related, but it's not directly related to our MS4 program. So, I'd say 10% probably, I'd probably say more like 20%. And one of the benefits is that a lot of my job is actually public education and outreach. So there's a lot of overlap there. Our stormwater division is implementing and enforcing the stormwater management ordinance, which ties in directly to components of the minimum control measures. So all of us are tying it into our existing responsibilities, but we don't have one person that is dedicated specifically to MS4. If we get like a riverboat like Rob, maybe we'll have a little bit more of a budget, but right now it's just coming out of our regular budget every year. And one of the challenges I'm facing is trying to get training materials, which can be quite expensive. But we may do, and it's something we're able to do pretty effectively from an education and outreach standpoint, just because that's so much of our mission here. But that's all I got.
Rob, the second part of your question had to do with changes that might be coming. I'd be glad to talk a little bit about that, unless you want to move on to the next question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Go ahead and jump right in there. And then Jeff, I see your video just came on. So you're kind of the overall moderator on this. And, you get a couple of us water quality / engineer guys in, and we're going to talk till 4 o'clock if you don't stop us. So you need to just jump in too then. All right, Jeff?
Yeah, and the only other question that's up on the chat, I guess, has to do with where you were going, Mark. It's, was asking about the new requirements for monitoring and how that will affect the monitoring plan that you all have talked about that you're already doing.
Yeah, well, let me broaden my answer a little bit. So I don't want to talk just about the proposed changes to the monitoring requirements, although I think that fits under the same umbrella with what I'm going to say here. Is late, I want to say late last year, the IEPA came out with a draft permit, and there were a number of changes that they made in there, and all of them seemed like they were going to cost municipalities a lot more. And I didn't see any context in there that there was ever an analysis done about the cost benefit analysis. So a lot of changes were made that were going to cost municipalities a lot more, but it wasn't clear that it was necessarily going to provide a lot more benefit. So I wrote a letter to the EPA in response to that, as I'm sure others on this that are part of this meeting did. I haven't heard what's happened after they received their public comment, but my two major comments on that were, I noticed a drastic increase in the cost of compliance. Municipal budgets are already stretched thin. Besides these water quality requirements, which I think all of us would agree are worthwhile and valuable, the city also has to deal with a new statewide requirement to remove or replace lead service lines. And we also have a combined sewer. So this program deals with the separate storm sewers, but City of Aurora also has 16 combined sewer overflows, and we've got $140 million long-term control plan. So we've got a number of unfunded mandates that we've got to deal with and are already stretching budgets thin. Some of the changes the IEPA was putting forward were pushing enforcement of the state's ILR 10 permit. So the state has a permit that requires construction site erosion control, and the state was basically pushing the enforcement of their permit onto municipalities, meaning they wanted the cities to keep an inventory of the IEPA regulated sites. They wanted to track the city's inspections of the IEPA regulated sites.
Yeah.
They wanted cities to document enforcement actions the cities were taking on the IEPA sites, and then also educate contractors. And my suggestion to the IEPA is, if the IEPA isn't going to enforce their own requirements, if they're going to push down the municipalities, then the permit fees that the IEPA is collecting for these permits should be dispersed back to the cities who are going to be required to enforce these requirements.
Hey, Mark, can you remind everybody, for the benefit of the group, what those costs are? As I recall, they were rather expensive for like a construction site permit for a 2-acre site. What does that cost to get a permit from the IEPA?
Yeah, I don't remember off the top of my head. Since I haven't been a consultant in a little while, I'm not in the habit of paying those permit fees, but we certainly know that there are a number of sites in Aurora that require the permit. I just don't know what the cost is these days.
Sorry, and I didn't mean to put you on the spot. As I recall, it's something like $500 or $1,000, is it not? I don't know if anybody else could jump in.
Yeah, I think that's in the right ballpark.
Yeah, I think that's right.
The other change that I noticed, though, there seemed like there was a fundamental change in the number of the requirements in making the proposed permit requirements less flexible. So one of the things, even though everybody complained about the NPDES requirements when they came out because nobody knew what to do with them and it was going to cost money to do all this, at least those requirements were flexible so that a lot of the requirements were to the maximum extent practicable, meaning that the requirements for a city, a village like Barrington that has, it's a small city with very little staff and very little storm sewer, those requirements for Barrington weren't going to be the same as for the city of Aurora, which is a large city that has a lot of storm sewer and a larger budget. So everybody's requirement, they all had to do something along the lines of the 6 minimum control measures, but it was flexible so that municipalities could do the most that they could. And then the burden was on them to show the IEPA that they couldn't do more. But a lot of the requirements that are new in this draft permit are more of a one-size-fits-all. And so a couple that I had a problem with, for example, small municipalities were going to, one of the things that I thought was going to be particularly problematic for small municipalities is there's a new requirement in there to assess the changes in public awareness and behavior resulting from the stormwater management plan. So each municipality has this public education and outreach program. And the requirement is that municipalities were going to have to annually produce a statistically valid survey to determine whether the public was modifying their behaviors in response to the public education and outreach plan. And what I wrote to the EPA is, first of all, that's going to be a huge burden for small municipalities to do that. If that requirement is going to stay, it doesn't need to be done every year. It should be done maybe one time per permit cycle, but I still don't think that that's the right way for municipalities, small municipalities, to be spending their money. But for large municipalities, something else that I thought was going to be problematic is it's going to be a monumental effort. The IPA wants cities to document the results of quarterly inspections of every municipal building, municipal parking lot, and detention basin. There's about 500 detention basins in Aurora, and there are a number of, there's not just one city hall and one public works building. There are pump stations, and there's water towers, and there's police stations, and there's municipal buildings all over the city. They all have parking lots, and then there's parking lots, multiple parking lots at parks. To do a quarterly inspection of all those and document all those, then we really are talking about every city that's over a certain population, has a number of those buildings and sites, is going to have to hire a full-time employee to manage the program, plus do all these inspections. And it just is, I'm not sure what the benefit of inspecting every parking lot every quarter is going to be.
Yeah, no, that was another one that just kind of jumped out at me, is how in the world is anybody gonna do this unless you're living in a very, very tiny municipality, and you can have one person that can just go out and do that.
Yeah. So what I suggested to the EPA is that they should convene a stakeholder group to assess the benefits and costs of their proposed changes before any of it becomes effective. I don't know if they'll listen to me. Hopefully there are some others that responded in that same way, but that was my response to their proposed changes.
Great job explaining that, Mark. We did provide a very similar letter. The fact that we would have to hire additional staff, it just wouldn't happen. This is not something that is implementable. And as you said, it is full of unfunded mandates. I did call and talk to the person who drafted this, and I get the strong sense that it's not, what comes out is not going to be like what was proposed. I think there are going to be dramatic changes to the next iteration of it. But we'll have to see what actually comes out. But they're definitely pushing more towards tracking metrics, and I think that's because they want to be able to say that these programs are working. And but having to hire a statistician to document it is not feasible for most of our MS4 communities.
Yeah, one of the things I thought was interesting, what I have up on the screen here, what I shared, this is that draft permit, and this is specifically the monitoring. I know Holly had asked a question about the monitoring. So this is the monitoring section, and they're saying you have to use you have to use one or more of the following. And so they're saying, like here, item B, you have to evaluate stormwater quality impacts in one of the following methods. And so they have in-stream monitoring, measuring pollutant concentration over time, sediment monitoring, short-term extensive network monitoring, site-specific monitoring. So you kind of go through all of these things. I thought this one was interesting here. This item X here, right? This is kind of what the Fox River Study Group is doing. This collaborative watershed scale model monitoring, where you work collaboratively with other permittees or watershed group, et cetera, et cetera. So I thought that was really good, but you also have to then, I believe, meet this item C and say, which says that if ambient water quality monitoring is done, under one of these items, under anything under 2B, that you have to do monitoring to gauge storm should be performed within 48 hours of a precipitation event equal to or greater than a quarter inch in a 24-hour period. So again, it just kind of blows us out of the water as far as what we could realistically do.
Yeah. So Rob, just to kind of follow up with that, if what you did was under B, there was, MS4 permittees may evaluate stormwater quality and impacts using one or more of the following methods. So if you pick sediment monitoring, then I'm not sure how C relates to that. And maybe that's the point. Maybe that's why it says if ambient water quality monitoring under 2B is picked. So if you pick sediment monitoring, maybe you're not subject to
You
those
don't have to
requirements.
do that. Yeah.
But yeah,
Well, so I
that's
guess
not clear.
we'll have to see what comes out of Illinois EPA at the end of all this.
Yes.
Thank you all for your comments. We, as mentioned at the beginning, we have recorded this presentation. It'll be posted to the FREP webpage. If you want to go back to it and refer to it. But thank you, Mark, Scott, and Rob for your contributions on this. I hope folks found it valuable, but we've reached about 2:30 and I see that folks are starting to drop off the call. So that might mean Rob's been talking too much, maybe is what that means. I don't know.
Probably. And
Thank
I've
you all
understood.
for an excellent program. And of course, wait to see what comes out of Illinois EPA. You never know. And how much is realistically implementable. It's a fine line. We all want to do the right things to improve the water quality in our watersheds, but putting a bunch of unfunded mandates that don't even, like Mark pointed out, not even really sure the benefits of some of the things we're trying to require. And of course, we don't know how much US EPA is pushing on EPA to demonstrate that they have a better program either, since it is all really ultimately from the Clean Water Act and the US EPA. But
Correct, right.
hope that you all will join us for our February noon network. And until then, stay warm and stay safe.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you, everyone, gentlemen, ladies.